Um,
And on that note,
wow.
Maighdlin is here and
Maitland is here.
we're
Okay.
ready to pop them in.
Just keep
Um,
stop me before I tell another bad joke. But I'm glad that they're I am glad that they're here.
yes.
Um,
All right. I am promoting two panelists, and I am personally extremely excited about this because if you haven't had your birth chart read, you should absolutely do it. It may change your life. You're going to learn things about yourself that you always knew, but didn't know. I don't know. It's like having a hard copy of how you feel.
it's
Hello.
Oh,
hi.
Hello.
We're just all
How's it
talking about
going?
how excited we are for you to be
Yeah.
here.
yes.
Huzzah.
Yay.
All
It's going to be
right.
amazing.
I'm gonna mute and take off so I can use my loud keyboard to promote this segment on Twitter.
Same.
All right.
Hello.
How are you doing? I'll stay on for a little bit, and then if you have like a presentation or stuff, I'll just jump off. But I can definitely stay on the whole time too. Totally up to you.
Okay, I do have a PowerPoint that we can
Okay.
do. So
Yeah. Amazing. Yes. So if you just want to like introduce yourself, let people know, what's what you're up to and how amazing everything is that you do.
Aw. Okay. Hello. My name is Maighdlin Kelly. I am an astrologer, diviner, and jewelry maker. Most of my time is focused on astrology lately. Yeah, I'm excited to do this and also nervous because I'm shy, but here we are. Let's do it.
Yeah. All right. You should be able to share screen. If you aren't able to, I can
Alrighty.
help out.
Let's see. Go.
Okay,
Huzzah!
Cool. All right, I will
Alrighty.
pop myself out.
If there is a chat, I am not going to pay attention to it because anxiety.
Oh no, we've got it on the YouTube. Everyone has been super supportive and wonderful too, but yeah, you won't see any of that stuff because
Okay.
you just don't need to.
Alrighty.
Right.
So I guess we will get started then. So hello, welcome. Very happy to be here. A little bit more about me. So I am an astrologer, and I also do tarot in Lenormand and make jewelry. I am agender. Pronouns are they, them. I am gay, and I am autistic, ADHD, etc. I was born in Florida. I am of Irish, Pawnee, Seminole, and German descent. I was adopted as a baby, raised in New Jersey by an Italian-American settler family. I'm one of 6 adoptees throughout these families, and we're from all over the place. Yes, that's just a little bit about me. I was actually an astronomy nerd for way more of my life than I was interested in astrology, so it's kind of weird that this is what I'm doing now, but here we are. If you want to learn more about like how I went from astronomy to astrology, check out my interview on Some Other Sphere, that podcast, episode 41, where I go into that story a little bit more. But yeah, anyways, so let's get started. I'm gonna do this full screen thing. All right, my mic broke, by the way, like 2 hours before this presentation, so hopefully the sound doesn't suck.
It sounds really good.
Okay,
So
good.
You're perfect.
Relief.
That would
Okay,
happen
so-
though.
Yeah, it's exactly what I would like to have happen right before this. My very first time teaching astrology to people, and that's what happens. Anyways, so welcome to Astrology 101. This is basically going to be a brief introduction to Western natal astrology specifically, which is natal astrology is all about the charts of individual people. We're going to basically spend an hour-ish looking at the key components that make up a natal chart. And then at the end, we will synthesize all of those parts and see how they all fit together in Art Bell's chart. So, oh, and also there's going to be an announcement at the end. The chances of me forgetting this announcement are very high, but hopefully I won't forget. So anyways, let's get started. All right, so what the heck is astrology anyway? The definition of it that you'll find on Merriam-Webster is the divination of the supposed influences of the stars and planets on human affairs and terrestrial events by their positions and aspects. The definition of astronomy, the study of objects and matter outside the Earth's atmosphere and of their physical and chemical properties. So, astronomy and astrology came from the same place. Basically, they were born at the same time. They're basically two sides of the same coin. They're just really separated nowadays for all sorts of reasons. We're not going to get into the history of astronomy / astrology because there's not a lot of time. So anyways, the way I look at it is astronomy is the study of the observable universe, and then astrology is the study of our subjective human experience of said universe mirrored throughout our life. Macrocosm, microcosm, the whole idea of as above, so below that many of you are probably very familiar with. So astrology is not a science. It's not really trying to be a science. It's much more of a fancy calendar system and an art and a language just kind of all smashed together. So you wouldn't call, poetry or an art form science, and astrology is not trying to do that. So that's what it is. Okay, so why astrology? Why am I interested in this? Well, two sides of the same coin. I think one gives tremendous value to the other. You can't really have astrology without the astronomy. Astronomers would love to argue that you can absolutely have astronomy without astrology, but without that, soul, it's kind of dry and it doesn't tell the whole story. Because the way I see it, we are in a very interesting and convenient place in the solar system to be able to study the effects of a star. So yes, we could study that from any other planet, but where else do we get to see how life exists? Photosynthesis, life cycle of, plants, animals, bacteria, fungi. Can't really see that anywhere else. So we're just in a really nifty little spot. Total coincidence? I have no idea, maybe, but I think there is something a little bit more to that than just coincidence, because we are made of star stuff and we're also conscious of that fact, and we get to consciously participate in the universe. And that's kind of why I really like astrology, because it kind of just contains everything. One reason I really like it is because everyone inherently fits. Now, you may see that me being, mixed heritage, adoptee, trans agender, gay, neurodivergent, I exist in a weird liminal place where for the vast majority of my life, I heard nothing but, why don't you fit? Why can't you just yada, yada, yada? So astrology isn't trying to say, why don't you fit? When you look at your chart, you see that you have the exact same planets and signs that everybody else does. So all parts of your being and experience are therefore inherently a natural manifestation of the universe. So everybody inherently fits in astrology. It's just all of these parts are just arranged in a unique way for everyone. So being someone who has felt just like a bizarre aberration for most of their life, seeing myself reflected in such a holistic way was just really nice and reassuring and just kind of lovely. So because of that, astrology can be a really lovely tool for what Chani Nicholas refers to as radical self-acceptance. And that's basically just accepting yourself for who you are in its entirety and not like discarding any part of yourself, because you are inherently worthy and you shouldn't have to like discard any part of yourself, because there's this really lovely balance and harmony that you can see with astrology where nothing is over or underrepresented. Everything just kind of has its place. There is a time and a place for all manifestations of the universe. So anyways, astrology can also be a very useful tool for many other things besides personal growth and things like that. You can use electional astrology for like choosing a particular time and date to do a thing, and we'll get into different ways you can use astrology shortly. Yeah, so that's basically why I like it. Nobody needs astrology. Like, you can totally have a completely fine, normal, fulfilling life without ever checking your horoscope. But if you are like me, then it might be relevant to your interests. And also it's just really interesting and just really lovely. So anyways, there are different kinds of astrology. There are different traditions from all over the world. So there's the Western tradition, which has its origins with Hellenistic astrology, with got its origins from Mesopotamian and Egyptian. We're not going to get into the history because we do not have time. But anyways, there's also Islamic, Chinese astrology. There's a whole bunch of different astrologies from all over the planet that all have their own lineages that have been developed over thousands of years. So there's also different kinds of astrology. So there's different lineages and traditions, and then there's also different things that you can do with it. We're going to talk about natal astrology, which is the study of an individual's birth chart, but there's also horary, for example, which is much closer to like divination. It's basically you ask like a specific question, like, where's my wallet? Will I pass this exam? Things like that. That's what horary does. And then there's medical astrology, which is what it sounds like, and electional. So like, let's say you want to get married. What's the best space weather for getting married, sort of thing. All sorts of different things that you can use for astrology, use astrology for. So I use Western natal astrology primarily. I do electional on my own time, but I don't offer it professionally. Professionally, I do natal astrology. I use the tropical zodiac, and my particular approach is a mix of modern psychological, evolutionary, and Hellenistic influences. So Hellenistic is basically Greco-Roman, which started like the 1st century BCE. So there's a whole lot of different kinds of astrologies and traditions that I know nothing about because it is a vast, vast field. No one person will ever know all of astrology. It is literally impossible. There is always a ton of stuff to learn. So what we will be discussing today is basically the core components of what goes into a natal chart. So that's going to be the planets, aspects, signs, and houses. So we are pretty much going to like briefly go through what all the planets are, the signs and the houses and aspects. We're not going to do deep dives into any one of these things. The purpose of this class today is to basically familiarize you with all the things that astrologers are talking about online, because astrology is super popular now. So like, what the heck are all these people talking about? If you are new to astrology, it can be really overwhelming because there's like a whole bunch of different like symbols and just parts, moving parts. It's a whole lot. I get it. So we're going to basically just briefly go through what the parts are. And then we're going to look at Art Bell's chart and see how those parts fit together. So you can basically see what an astrology reading is like, basically. So here we go. The most important parts of a natal chart is basically the planets and the aspects. The planets are like behavioral archetypes. The planets are like the action, like the stuff that's actually happening in the chart. The aspects are basically geometric relationships between those planets. So you can think of the planets as like actors, and the aspects are kind of like the script, the lines that the planets are like saying to each other, like things like that. The houses is basically where the action is happening. So the houses are areas of life. And then the signs are basically like energetic conditions. The signs can either help the planets do what they want to do, or they can make it more challenging. A lot of astrology content out there focuses entirely on the signs, but that is not the most important part. That's not really where all the action is. So the planets and aspects are the most important, and everything else is basically nuance. The most important nuance is the houses and signs. So anyways, let's keep going. Let's start with the planets. So I'm going to begin with this quote here that I actually first came across in a tarot class from Jessica Dore that I took a few years ago. And this quote was actually my pinned tweet for like 2 years because it just so perfectly captures what the planets are and also the aspects. So anyways, the quote is this: rather than consisting of one unified self, we each contain an internal family of diverse psychological parts that sometimes live peacefully and sometimes in conflict. This is from Robert Schwartz, and you may want to go look up internal family systems, which is not an astrology thing. I highly doubt this person is an astrologer, so he may be very confused if he finds this quote in this presentation. But I am including this quote because it's just so, it's such a clear explanation of how the planets and aspects work in a chart, because this internal family of psychological parts is basically the planets, and sometimes they're peacefully and sometimes they're in conflict, and that's basically aspects. So let's talk about the planets. So the planets, as I said, are basically like the action, the actors, what's actually happening in the chart. They're basically like behavioral archetypes. So like Mars is like the drive and assertive nature, whereas Venus is like the relational nature, so on. So the planets, we are including the luminaries, sun and moon. Astrologers know that the sun is not a planet. We are familiar with the fact that the sun is an average yellow type G star in the main sequence and not a planet. But we just kind of lump all of these things under the title planets for convenience, basically. So we got the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Then there's also the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And there's also asteroids, dwarf planets. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can use. I pretty much just use the 7 traditional planets: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the outers, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Once in a while, I'll use asteroids, but there's just like so much information with the planets that I don't find it necessary all that much to go further with it. So anyways, let's go into planets now. So let's start with the sun. It's the core of the solar system. So the sun astrologically has to do with consciousness, core essence, and perception, because it is illuminating the solar system, holding everything together. So therefore, the core self. Now the moon has much more to do with the unconscious nature, kind of like the mirror of the sun. The sun is consciousness, the moon is the emotional unconscious nature. It is the closest celestial body to the earth, so it has a lot to do with containment and nourishment of the soul. It's very changeable, it's different phase all the time, very fast in the sky. So the sun has a lot more to do with, like core being beyond time, whereas the moon is much more tied in with time and things being in flux and shifting in life cycles and things of that nature. So now let's go into Mercury, which is the closest planet to the sun. So Mercury in the sky is all over the place. Its speed is very variable, and it's very close to the sun. So it has to do with perception translated, because it basically takes all of the information and knowledge from the sun and it translates it so that it can communicate it outside of itself. So I see Mercury as like the information processing planet. It has a whole lot to do with communications, talking, writing, all that sort of deal. And now moving out to Venus, we have the relational archetype. Venus is basically like the harmony of the universe. Venus likes everybody to just like get along and be nice. Venus likes pretty things. It's all about things that are pleasurable to the senses. Venus likes to unite and reconcile things. It likes to take two separate things and unite them to make something new and better. So like taking red and blue to make purple, or flour and water to make bread, or human A and human B to make baby human C. All of that is Venusian stuff. Now Mars is basically the opposite of that. So Venus is harmony, Mars is strife. Mars doesn't want to get along. Mars just kind of wants to do its own thing. It wants to like break apart and separate and just like assert its own nature and not really like bend to the wills of anything else. So it's basically the opposite of Venus. Now Jupiter, further out, is the planet that relates to all things big. It's a big planet, so we get like we can often get a literal manifestation of big things with Jupiter, but it also has to do with increase and optimism and faith, expanding your horizons. Jupiter has a lot to do with foreign people and places and things that are unfamiliar to you, long journeys and things of that nature. Now Saturn, the opposite of Jupiter, has more to do with decrease and limits and structure, and also manifestation and crystallization, limits, finality, but also longevity and maturity. So that's basically the planets in a nutshell. Moving along, the 7 traditional ones that we just went over are much more important. Historically, that's all we were aware of for the majority of human history. So they're most important for that reason, but also for visibility. Like these are the ones that we're actually able to see in the sky. We can see the sun and moon, of course, Mercury. Venus in the sky is beautiful to look at. It's just so radiant and lovely, and ended up being related to lovely things. Mars, however, in the sky is this like ominous looking red dot, not as pretty looking as Venus. Jupiter is also really bright in the sky, really easy to see, really lovely. And Venus and Jupiter are known as the benefics, and they also look really nice. And then Saturn does not look very nice in the sky, to the naked eye at least. It looks kind of just like this dumpy little brown dot. It's not very exciting. If you have a very good telescope, it is breathtaking though. If you have the opportunity to go visit an astronomy club, oh my gosh. Astronomers do not like it when you accidentally refer to them as astrologers. They get so mad. So anyways, I highly recommend visiting an astronomy club to use a big scope to look at Saturn or Jupiter through it, because it's just incredible. Anyways, these planets are important for that, but also they are most apparent and relevant to the structure of our lives. So like the days of the week, for example, are all based off of these planets. So like lunedì, Luna, Moon, Monday, Martedì, Mars, Tuesday, Mercoledì, Wednesday, Mercury, and so on and so forth. So the planets are just so ingrained to our everyday lives to the point where we like don't even think about it, but our whole lives are structured around these planets. Like we have day and night, so like everything about our life revolves around the sun, like literally. So it's just so interesting to me. Like we named the days of the week and our structure of time based off of planets specifically. That's not an accident. So another reason that these planets are very important is because of rulership, which basically means they influence the meaning of the signs. And that's why we're starting with the planets here now, because when you understand what the planets are all about, it's easier to, figure out what the signs are about. So like, for example, Aries is the fiery manifestation of Mars, whereas Scorpio is the watery manifestation of it. And we will get into that. So these planets are the most important. Everything beyond that is basically more nuance. I really enjoy using these planets. They are not from traditional lineages of astrology. They are more modern. I always forget the dates when these were discovered. We'll look it up. I have learned it and forgotten it like hundreds of times. Anyways, I use these planets because they're just ridiculously apparent in my own chart, so I can't get away from them even if I wanted to. So anyways, Uranus, that's the planet that is right after Saturn. So Saturn has to do with like limits and structure. Uranus is the opposite of that. Uranus is disruption from routine. It's like a chaotic neutral influence. It has to do with like sudden bursts of inspiration and insight. It also has to do with like things that you can't unknow once you know it, which can be a very like shocking and disruptive kind of experience. Uranus, I also see very often having to do with tech and innovation, and anyone who has used tech at any point in their life knows how disruptive it can be. Like my mic dying 2 hours before this presentation. So that's great. Rick Levine was recently on the Astrology podcast talking about Uranus. They did like a 3-hour episode on it. So if you want to go like a deep dive into all the planets, go look for these episodes on the Astrology podcast. Really good stuff. But anyways, he was talking about how the 7 traditional planets are related to like visibility and whatnot, but the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, we cannot see with the naked eye. I mean, once in a while, in certain conditions, you can see Uranus, but generally speaking, you can't. Neptune, you definitely cannot. Same with Pluto. So basically, these planets kind of opened up our world to more unseen influences. So like Uranus kind of ended up coinciding with electricity. We can't really like see electricity, but we can like work with it and things like that. So, and that radically changed and disrupted a whole bunch of stuff. So that's Uranus. Now there's Neptune, which is further out still. Neptune can be really tricky. It's all things like nebulous and confusing and intangible and invisible. One experience of Neptune, like if you've ever driven through thick fog and you can't see like anything around you, you have no idea where the fog begins and ends until eventually you're out of it and you're like, oh, whoa. That's kind of like what Neptune is like. In its more difficult manifestation. Another manifestation of Neptune I like to describe as like when you're at a concert and you're just vibing with the music so much that you are just kind of like become the music and you forget who you are, all of your worries, you have no idea what is going on, and you just kind of like lose your whole identity and just like vibe. That's very Neptunian as well. So Neptune will have a lot to do with like music and poetry and movies and things like that, because they are illusory. They're not real kind of thing. So, and then there's Pluto, which Jessica Lanyadou refers to as the least chill planet. And that's definitely the case. Pluto is all about elimination and destruction, transformation, regeneration, power and intensity, and all things like that. So Pluto is like going from caterpillar to butterfly. It's completely transforming that organism to something completely unrecognizable. Same with like garbage to compost. It has a lot to do with like deep total alchemical change and things like that. So yeah. So you may notice as we start from the sun and zoom out, the meanings of the planets have a lot to do with, at first the core personality, the core of the solar system. So the sun, the core essence, moon, the emotional nature, and so on. And then as you zoom out, you start getting more into like relational aspects. So it's not just you, it's you and other people. And then you zoom out to like Jupiter and Saturn, and then you get to much more like societal things, because these planets take a lot longer to go around the sun. So therefore, the things that they are dealing with are not as personal. You just kind of like keep zooming out. And then when you have the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, that is not at all personal. And that is just things that are just like way bigger than you, basically, much more generational. So let's go into the aspects now. The aspects are basically geometric relationships between the planets along the ecliptic specifically. Now, the ecliptic is the path that the sun and planets are taking across the sky, and which is also basically the Earth's path around the sun. From our perspective on Earth, it looks like the sun and planets are moving, but it's basically the Earth that's moving around the sun. Anyways, this is the plane that we are getting the aspects from. So 360-degree circle can be divided in many ways, but there are 5 main ways that the circle is divided. So 0 degrees, conjunction. So that's basically when 2 planets appear to be right on top of each other in the sky. And what you get with a conjunction aspect is basically the archetypes between those planets are fused together and they work like as a unit. It's said to be the most powerful conjunction. And if you recall, when Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct in the sky, everyone was freaking out about it because it's like really easy to see, because when 2 planets are conjunct, it's like, ooh, bigger and brighter, and oh, that's interesting. Whereas the other aspects are not as like visually striking and apparent, but they're still important. So conjunction, the archetypes are fused, working together. And now we can go into the opposition. So 180 degrees away from each other in opposition. So these aspects can be very tense because it's one thing opposite the other. So there is like a balance that's kind of necessary. Just like you can't have 2 people talking at once for it to make sense. One kind of has to go first and then the other one can go. So in opposition, you'll often find it in like self-other interactions, so like you and another person. It can definitely be an internal process, but because it is like one planet with another planet in its direct line of sight, you're often going to see it manifesting with, you know, just like other people and things like that. So now there is the square aspect, which is 90 degrees away, and when planets are in a square aspect, they're basically at cross purposes. So there's a lot of friction here. I like to say that it is the path of most resistance. So squares are really like dynamic and energetic. They're very like frictiony. They're kind of relentless. So there is like a balance and a harmony that you can kind of achieve with an opposition. Not so much a square. Square aspects pretty much demand like constant flexibility and attention and care and what's the word I'm looking for? Like reconciliation, like that, because the archetypes, they are working at cross purposes. So the square is said to be a very difficult aspect. All of the aspects are neutral because you can absolutely have too much of a good thing, and squares can be really good in the right circumstance, because this is the sort of energy that fuels one towards like constantly developing something. So the people who have put 10,000 hours of practice into something, that is very often going to be like square kind of energy, because it's like relentless and it's energizing, and there's not much incentive to really develop and master something if you don't have tension and like friction behind it. So that's a square in a nutshell. Now trine is when planets are 120 degrees away. Trine is like the path of least resistance. It's a very flowy kind of energy. So a lot of people will say that trines are good, but you could definitely have too much of a good thing. Maybe you don't want an easy flow in certain times. So again, it's neutral, but basically when planets are in a trine aspect, they can just kind of like work together really well. It can often indicate like inherent conditions that are already like there and happening because it is the path of least resistance for energy. So it's just like most likely going to manifest in this particular way. And then we have sextiles, which is like the awkward middle child that tends to get forgotten in the aspects all the time. But I love sextiles. I think they're so much fun. They're really cool. It's kind of like a combination between a square and a trine. It's not as difficult and relentless as a square, but it's still like really excitable. I see sextiles as aspects of opportunities, because they can be nice in that trine way, where it's a lot easier to work with. But the difference between a sextile and a trine is a sextile requires you to like actively participate, whereas a trine is the kind of energy that's like just most likely going to just happen anyway. A sextile is the kind of flow that you can get, but you have to like go get it kind of deal. So those are the most important ones. They're also based off of visibility too. So like an opposition, self-other, direct line of sight, conjunction, like right at once. But like if it's only like 20 degrees away, it's kind of like in that blind spot where you can't really see it. Or instead of being directly in front of you, if something is like off to the side, that's another blind spot in our visibility. So that aspect is not really there, but everything else is just kind of like easy to see. There are many other ways to divide this 360 degrees, and so you can get like septiles, noviles, semi-squares. There's a ton of different aspects. They're all minor aspects. They're not as important. I don't use any of them, except for aspects of declination, which is not based off of the ecliptic. It's based off of something else, but we don't have time to get into that. Anyways, if you are really into like math and fractals, I recommend looking up David Cochrane's work on vibrational astrology, because that gets, that's really interesting stuff. So that's the aspects. We've covered the planets, we've covered the aspects. Now let's talk about the signs. So a lot of you are probably very familiar with this sort of image, which I just got from Wikipedia, basically. So this is a representation of the zodiac. So the zodiac comes from the constellations, but it's not the same thing. There is a difference. There is the constellations, then there's the sidereal zodiac, and then there's the tropical zodiac. So the constellations, fixed stars in the sky, the constellations are all different sizes, but the sidereal zodiac and the tropical zodiac, all of the signs are the same size. So basically where we get that from, the sidereal zodiac is based on the constellations and fixed stars, but the tropical zodiac is based off of seasons and not the fixed stars. So the tropical zodiac begins at 0 degrees Aries, which is basically just the vernal equinox. So that's the difference between those three things. So the signs of the zodiac have a lot to do with the condition of the planets. It's much more of like the background ambiance. The signs are not the active players in a chart the way the planets are. The signs can either help the planets do what they want to do, or it can make it more challenging for the planets to do what it wants to do. So like Mars, for example, ball of fire, just wants to go off and do its own thing, is very comfortable in Aries, a fire sign. It's not all that comfortable in Libra, for example, which is a Venusian sign. So Libra is much more concerned with getting along, but Mars doesn't want to get along. So that's why Mars doesn't really like being in Libra all that much. So that's basically what we mean by the condition of the planets and like what the signs do. So the signs can be divided in several ways. We can divide it by 2 to get nocturnal and diurnal signs. We can divide it by 3, which gives us signs that are at the beginning, middle, and end of seasons. And then we can divide it by 4 to get the elements. So let's go into that. Signs divided by 2. There are diurnal signs and there are nocturnal signs. The diurnal signs are all of the fire and air signs. So fire and air is a much more upward and outward kind of energy. So this includes Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, and Aquarius. And the nocturnal signs are all the earth and water signs. So this is a more downward and inward kind of energy, which is including Taurus, Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, Capricorn, and Pisces. Now we can divide it by 3 and get the signs at the beginning of seasons, which is cardinal signs, fixed in the middles, and mutable at the end. So cardinal signs, the beginning of seasons. So since it's the beginning, cardinal signs are very like initiating and reactive and responsive to things. They don't have much like staying power, and they're not like the most flexible. They want to start things a lot, not necessarily finish things. They want to start. So Aries is the beginning of spring. It is cardinal fire. Cancer is the beginning of summer. It's cardinal water. Libra, the beginning of fall, cardinal air, and then Capricorn, cardinal earth, beginning of winter. Now the fixed signs are all in the middle of seasons. They have a very like stabilizing, sustaining, and enduring energy. They don't really want to change or like start new things. They're just kind of like there. It's the middle of the season. So Taurus, fixed earth, it's the middle of spring. Leo, the middle of summer, fixed fire. Scorpio, the middle of fall, fixed water. And then Aquarius, middle of winter, fixed air. And then finally, we have the signs happening at the end of seasons, which is much more concerned with transitioning from one thing to the next. They're very like flexible and changeable, not very much staying power. A little trickier to get them to start things, but from going from one thing to the next and being really flexible, mutable signs are great at that. So Gemini is mutable air. It is the beginning of spring. Virgo is, did I say the beginning of spring? The end of spring. Virgo, the end of summer, mutable earth. Sagittarius, mutable fire, end of fall. And then Pisces, end of winter, mutable water. And then we can divide the signs by 4 and get the elements. So we've got fire, earth, air, and water. Now, if you have any sort of like magical, occult, or like tarot practice, you're already very familiar with these elements. So fire is hot and dry. It's an upward and outward kind of energy. So it has to do with like passion and like instinct and energy and things like that. So the fire signs are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. We've got cardinal fire, fixed fire, and mutable fire. Now, earth is next in the zodiac. The particular order that the elements take in the zodiac is fire to earth to air to water to fire to earth to air to water, and it keeps repeating. So earth is cold and dry. It's much more of like a downward, inward kind of energy. So therefore it's grounded, very like practical and pragmatic. And the earth signs are Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. And then air, hot, wet element. It's very upward and outward again. And air, it has to do with the realm of like intellect and like inquisitiveness and communication and things like that. So with air, we've got Gemini, mutable air, and then cardinal air, Libra, fixed air, Aquarius. And then water, cold and wet, down and in, much more intuitive and feeling. And these are the, it's Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So Cancer, cardinal, water, Scorpio, fixed water, Pisces, mutable water. So that's basically how the signs are divided. It's a lot easier to learn the signs by breaking it down to like its core parts, because then you can build off from there very easily. So let's go through all of the signs real quick. Aries, the beginning of spring, cardinal fire. So it is very reactive in like an energetic, instinctive kind of way. Aries is the fiery manifestation of Mars. So Mars likes to just go off and do its own thing, and Aries can absolutely help facilitate that. Mars is right at home in Aries. So Mars in Aries is like the warrior archetype of the big brute who's just gonna like charge at you and like club you on the head and be done with it. Whereas Scorpio is the watery manifestation of Mars, and that has a totally different feel to it. So we'll get into that. Taurus, fixed earth. So Taurus is basically like the immovable object of the zodiac. So it's very like reliably grounded. It's very like steady and you don't want to ask a Taurus to stop what they're doing to go do something else. It's not going to work out for you very well. Taurus is also a Venusian sign. It is the earthly manifestation of Venus. So Taurus is very concerned with just chilling and vibing, and it doesn't want to start shit with anyone. It just kind of wants to like be like serene and just like be peaceful and just like get along, and that's fine. So moving on, we have Gemini, mutable air. So it's very intellectually flexible. Gemini is the airy manifestation of Mercury, and we know Mercury likes data and facts and communication and things like that. So Mercury is right at home in a intellectually flexible, mutable air sign because it has a lot of ability to just like go find all the facts and details. It can talk to several different people, and it just really enjoys being in Gemini. So those are the spring signs. And now the summer signs, we've got Cancer, cardinal water. So Cancer is a very like emotionally and intuitively responsive kind of sign. So like if you got a room full of people and a baby starts crying, Cancer is going to be the one that responds to that right away because it's just like very emotionally responsive. And Cancer is where the moon is most at home. And we know that the moon has a lot to do with like emotional things and containment and nourishment. So, and also the moon is like very close to us. So the moon has a lot to do with Cancer and like nourishment. So we get a lot of the like nourishing motherly vibes from Cancer that comes from the moon. Now we have Leo, which is fixed fire. And what else is more fixed fire in the solar system than the sun? So the sun is right at home in Leo. It's very energetically enduring. Leo people are just who they are, and that's it. They're not going to change who they are for you. That's fixed fire. And now Virgo, mutable earth. It is the earthly manifestation of Mercury. So Virgo is very like flexibly practical. So we know Mercury likes all of the details and the facts and things. So the earthly manifestation of Virgo is a little bit more like hands-on. Virgo likes to explore complex systems and like see how they work. Whereas like the airy manifestation of Gemini, it can be completely content just like reading up a bunch of stuff. Virgo wants to like build a computer or like do all of the coding itself kind of thing, because it really likes to see how all of the little pieces like fit and work together. It's very concerned with systems and things like that. So now moving on to Libra, cardinal air. So it's a very intellectually responsive sign. It is Venusian, a Venusian sign. Venus is right at home here. So Libra, balance, wants everybody to get along. It is very concerned with like interpersonal relationships. So like if you say one thing to Libra, it wants to see what the other sides are to it. It's not going to just like take one thing at face value because it's that balance. Libra is not the sign that wants to take sides, which is where that indecisiveness can come from, because Venus doesn't want to take sides. Venus wants like everyone to like get along. So Libra is like the mediator of the zodiac, basically. Now we get to Scorpio, which is a Mars-ruled sign. It is the watery, emotional manifestation of Mars, and it is fixed water. So Scorpio is very emotionally enduring. So Scorpio, it likes to like seep down and like penetrate things. It reminds me of like the Mariana Trench, for example, or an iceberg, especially because with an iceberg, you're only seeing like the tip of it, basically. There's a whole lot more underneath the surface that you don't get to see, and that is very Scorpio. Scorpio as an archetype will never show you everything that it is feeling. It likes to keep its cards like really close to its hand. Scorpio is always scheming, has a plan, because it's Mars, and Mars is like a very like actiony planet, and it wants to sever. So that's why Scorpio doesn't naturally feel inclined to share its emotions with other people all that much. Now moving on to Sagittarius, we've got mutable fire. So Sagittarius is very energetically adaptive. It is the fiery manifestation of Jupiter, and Jupiter has a lot to do with, belief and optimism. So Sagittarius people with that fiery Jupiterian nature can be like really overzealous about things, really enthusiastic. Yeah, they're great. And now moving on to Capricorn, is the earthly manifestation of Saturn. It is cardinal Earth, so it's very like practically responsive and reactive. Capricorn is the sign that is like always has a to-do list. If it sees a mountain, it is going to climb the mountain. It's just what Capricorn wants to do. Aquarius, we've got the middle of winter, so this is fixed air. It is the airy manifestation of Saturn. So Saturn having to do with like limits and structure and things like that. In an earthly way, it has a little bit more to do with, like tradition and things like that. But Aquarius is fixed air. So it's kind of like the sky. It's like separated from everything else. It's just like way up there. So Aquarius people can get like really zoomed out and meta, and they're not really interested in interpersonal relationships quite like Libra, a Venusian personal planet sign. Saturn, Aquarius, it's very concerned with humanity as a whole, but not necessarily individual people. So that's Aquarius in a nutshell. And then we have Pisces, mutable water. It is the watery manifestation of Jupiter, the more emotional manifestation of this jovial nature. So Pisces is very concerned with like being devoted to things, lots to do with faith. Pisces wants everyone to just like be together and okay and like nice and happy, things like that. So that's the signs in a nutshell. Now let's talk about the houses. Okay, so this is a blank chart, which is basically showing you the signs at the colorful outer ring here, and then all these little chunks here with the numbers 1 through 12. These are the houses. So we get the houses from the Earth. The Earth's rotation on its axis. So the signs we're getting from the year and the seasons, and then the houses we're getting from the day. So because it's Earth-based, as opposed to just like way out there, the houses have to do with areas of life where like all the stuff is happening. So let's go into that. I'm going to briefly go through this because last time I did a practice run of this presentation, it went to like almost 3 hours. So I'm going to skip through a few things. The angular houses are most important. So let's look at this chart again here. You can split the houses, much like how we were splitting up the signs. So the houses can be split between above the horizon and below the horizon. So 1 through 6 here, below the horizon. And then everything above that is like out in the sky. Okay, so above the horizon and below the horizon. You can also split the houses from things that are rising up to the top of the sky and things that are setting. The angular houses are most important. So basically the horizon here. So house 1, that is where everything is rising up from below ground to above ground. So house 1 has a lot to do with like the area of life that focuses on you, yourself, your body, mind, soul, personality, you as like a vessel through space and time. It is the most you area of life, the most you part of the chart. And then directly opposite that is house 7, which is where all of the one-on-one partnerships go, basically. So whether that is like your romantic partner, your business partner, your therapist, any kind of one-on-one relationship is 7th house stuff. And then the middle of the sky, house 10, that has to do with the career. It's the most public, visible part of the sky, so that's why it's very important. And then directly underneath that, you have house 4, which is below ground and like the private life. So anyways, the houses can be split like that. They are also split into angular, succedent, and cadent. We're just gonna skip over that because there's just so much to go through. So house 1 has to do with the self, body, first impressions, moving along from that. So like, you know how when the planets we're starting with like the core self, the core personality, and then we're slowly zooming out. So we're going from the self to like other people, and then, you know, zooming out further and further still. The houses are kind of like that too, where house 1 is the most you part. And then as you get further away from house 1, you get more into just like, you know, your stuff and other people and society, and it just kind of zooms out from there. So house 1 we've already discussed, and now house 2, directly right next to it, has to do with your resources and your values. So like the things that you own, but also the things that you value. Talents will go here too. And then house 3 has to do with siblings and mobility and communication. So you've got you and your stuff, and then how you share your stuff, how you talk about your stuff, how you get around. House 3 is all like short trips and things of that nature. And then house 4 is your home and private life. It's directly underground, so it is not visible to, you know, out in the sky at all. It is one of the most private parts of your life, and has to do with like ancestry and things like that. Moving along to the 5th house, this is the place of creativity and pleasure. If you have children, that's where they're going to go. If not, it'll have a lot more to do with, you know, like creative special interest, pleasure, performing. Gambling can be here. Whatever you take pleasure in is all 5th house stuff. Moving along to the 6th house. This is the house that deals with maintenance of all sorts. So like the maintenance and upkeep of your body and your health, but also like, you know, your home, your pets, small animals are a 6th house thing, service workers, like if you have employees, that's all going to go there. And now we have house 7 directly opposite the 1st house. So all of the one-on-one partnerships. And moving on from there to the 8th house, we've got the partners as resources. So you can see how like house 1 is you, and right after that is your stuff. House 7, right opposite house 1, is your partner, and then house 8, opposite 2, is your partner's stuff. So the 8th house has a lot to do with like taxes and your partner's resources, and also like death, and it can also have to do with like mental health things as well. And now the 9th house is all about like long journeys and legal spiritual matters and higher education. So like pilgrimages, going to college, all that stuff is very 9th house matters. And then the 10th house, the middle of the sky, the most publicly like recognizable part of the chart, has all to do with like your career and your greater reputation, but also like what you have to offer the world. And then moving on, we've got the 11th house, which has to do with like your greater social networks. So like friends, fans, and allies, larger groups of people that you all share like the same values and hopes and dreams with. That's all 11th house. And then finally, we've got the 12th house. There is a lot of anxiety-inducing things written about the 12th house on the internet. Oh boy. So the 12th house is a difficult house, yes, but it's not all bad. So all of our life is represented within these 12 houses, and our life is not entirely nice and not entirely difficult. It is a blend, so all aspects are going to be represented. So the 12th house, it's has a lot to do with like seclusion and behind the scenes work and things like that. So let me pop back over to this chart here. So you can see the 1st house, this is when things are rising. So like when the sun is rising, you can see it, but when it rises a little bit further, it ends up in the 12th house. And when it rises a little bit further above the horizon, you can no longer see it because it is too bright. So that's why the 12th house has a lot to do with like invisible things. So it's very often like behind the scenes stuff. So this could be anything from like, you know, going on a silent meditation retreat. I also will often see people who do a lot of work like sequestered away in like a recording studio, things like that. That's all 12th house stuff as well. The 12th house also has a lot to do with self-undoing. and like things that kind of like work at cross purposes to like what you want to do. Because of that like visibility thing, it's not like, it's a house that's like kind of in that blind spot compared to like where you are, the first house is. So that's why it's things that it's not easy to see, and it can be really difficult to access things in the 12th house. Whereas the planets that are on the angles, like 1st, 7th, 4th, and 10th, they're a lot easier to like see and recognize and work with, and they have a lot more energy. Things in the 12th house do not have all that much energy. They're a little trickier. So that's basically the houses. So let's do a little recap. We learned about the planets. So that's basically what's happening, the actors, basically behavioral archetypes, the aspects you can think of as like the script between the planets and the archetypes. It's their interactions, what they're saying to each other, like how well they're working together versus, so like if they're in a square aspect, they're not best friends, they're at cross purposes. But if they're like in a trine aspect, they're probably getting along pretty well, kind of deal. And then we have the signs, which is like the mood and the condition of the planets. So like, is Mars the assertion archetype? Is it like comfortable and happy where it is, or is it kind of grumpy because it's in a location that makes it like have to like get along, you know? So the signs are going to have a lot to do with much more like ambiance and mood. And then the houses, which is where all the action is. So it's basically like the stage that the actors are on. So those are the four main parts of a natal chart. So before we go on further, you're doing great. If you're brand new to this, I understand that there is a whole lot of moving parts. There's a whole lot to learn. So if you're overwhelmed, don't worry. You're not going to have all of this memorized right away. Because astrology is just a whole bunch of moving parts that you have to just like focus on all at once, and it's not something that you can learn overnight. There's really no shortcuts to it. So just practice. You're doing great. I promise you're doing great. If you ever worry that it's taking you too long to learn this stuff, just remember that it took me like 10 years just to remember how to spell Sagittarius. So like, I am a slow learner, but like, that's okay. We're all learning at our own pace. Nobody is expecting you to learn this all right away. So don't worry about it. You're doing fine, I promise. Okay, so now we're going to get into Art Bell's chart. Very fun. So just a brief note about birth times in astrology. It's very, very, very important to have an accurate birth time. So when I choose a chart for something like this, I am looking at astro.com first, usually, because they have like a really solid data bank of people's charts and birth times. And they also have like a really particular rating system that basically rates how accurate the birth time is. So like an AA rating means that whoever the astrologer was that submitted the birth time for the individual had the birth certificate like in hand. We do not have Art Bell's birth certificate, or the astrologers that put his information on this website did not have his birth certificate. So the time and date that I'm using is from Art's autobiography, which is an A rating, and that is the next best thing. There are 2 other birth times floating around out there, but they're only different by like 5 or 10 minutes, and it doesn't change his chart all of that much. So for this purpose, it's fine. It's fine. We're not gonna worry about it. So here we go. Art Bell's chart. Huzzah. So right away, we can see that there is a lot more going on above the horizon. So a lot of things that are just like much more like publicly and objectively recognizable. We can see that there's this lot of stuff, especially up in the 10th house here. So we know that the 10th house has to do with like career and reputation and things like that. So if we had no idea who Art Bell was, or if we didn't see his name here, we could tell right away that whoever this person is, they're probably really well known for their particular career talking about stuff, because 10th house is all about career. The sun is like the core self, the core essence, the core being. Mercury is the communicative nature, has a lot to do with like talking, and the midheaven, which is like the mathematical point that's like the middle of the sky, in the 10th house. So right away we have someone who is publicly known and recognizable for talking a lot to a lot of different people. Mercury, wonderful. We also have got Uranus up here too. We know Uranus has a lot to do with like techie things, but also weird stuff and disruptive things. We know that Art was very involved with tech because he was really, really into radio stuff, not just like listening to it and talking on it, but like all of like the engineering aspects, he was really, really good at. So there you go. There's the techie aspect that he's publicly known for. There's also like the weird aspect of Uranus that's dealing with like unusual, eccentric, or like shocking kind of things. And he's definitely talked about like shocking, unusual, weird stuff on his show. So that's kind of a literal manifestation. But then there's also that disruptive nature with Uranus that we can see in his life, because like he would like suddenly stop doing a show and then suddenly start and then suddenly stop again, or he would get like really like shocking things that his guests would say, like the Area 51 guy. That's very shocking. And then that call was also kind of disruptive because suddenly the text stopped working and the broadcast just cut out. So what was going on there? We may not know if that is like a real call. I think it was a hoax, but at the same time, you can still see that like disruptive, shocking, weird nature reflected in the chart there. Really interesting. So we talked a whole lot about his sun in Gemini here. Let's talk a little bit more about his moon in Virgo over here. Oh yeah, I probably should have mentioned this earlier. If you've ever seen charts like this before, you probably have seen ones with a whole bunch of lines in the middle here, which is basically aspect lines. It's just like a visual representation of, the aspects. I hate it. I do not like to have the lines in my chart because it is just like too distracting and noisy and chaotic looking for me. Even though I'm only using 5 aspects, it's just too much. I can't deal with it. So the way I like to see aspects is basically by matching those. So you can see here his sun is at 26 degrees Gemini and his Mercury is at 28 degrees Gemini. That's a conjunction. It's not 0 degrees apart, but it's pretty close. We can use astrologers use varying orbs, is what's called. So like a conjunction can be within 10 degrees. Some say it's only within like 5. Some people will say that if it's involving the sun or moon, you can make it up to 15 or whatever. The closer it is, the more apparent it is, basically. So Art's sun and Mercury are conjunct. So the core essence and the communicative nature basically have the same vibe. So Art is a Gemini sun, but he's a little bit more of a stereotypical Gemini because his Mercury is also there in the same sign. So the way that Art communicates his experience and his thoughts pretty much have the same vibe as like his core essence in general. So like if his Mercury was in Cancer or Taurus, those are more downward, inward kind of energies as opposed to air, which is much more upward and outward. So people with Gemini sun, but a Mercury in Taurus or Cancer are not going to be as like obviously stereotypically like a Gemini, basically. But Art's Mercury is right there in Gemini, and he absolutely was much more of a stereotypical Gemini. So another aspect that we can see here, the sun at 26 degrees Gemini, there's also the moon at 27 degrees Virgo. So that's basically 90 degrees away. So 90 degrees, we know, is a square aspect. So that's a very dynamic, energetic aspect, one of great friction. So when the moon is in a square aspect with the sun, you get a quarter phase moon. So the moon, we know, is like the emotional nature that is reflecting the core light of the sun. Art's moon is in a first quarter phase, so it is increasing in light. And one way I like to describe how his moon phase kind of manifested in his life is like how he interacted with his guests. So like a waxing crescent moon phase, it's going from new and increasing in light, but it's still like really new. So waxing crescent moon people are very like enthusiastic and just like ready to show up. It's kind of like if you think of a plant, when it's the new moon, it's like the seed, but then you get the little sapling. It's increasing in light, so that's kind of like the waxing crescent phase, and then it wants to shed its baby leaves and get the big leaves and start accumulating a whole lot more light and knowledge. So you can kind of see this with art, because he thought about a whole lot of different things. He had lots of his own ideas, but he was willing to like pause and set aside what he thought to like make space for whatever it was that his guest or whatever the caller wanted to talk about. So a quarter moon is a very like shifting gears sort of moon, because we're going from crescent to gibbous, and in the first quarter moon we're increasing in light. So there's a very like distinct shifting gears sort of vibe that you can see with him. It is most clearly seen in the first house, because that's where his moon is, and the 10th house, the career. So that shifting gears of wanting to find more information and like stories and like see what other people are have to say is manifesting in like the career life and also him. And as a radio show personality, that makes a whole lot of sense. So that's the moon. His moon phase. His moon is also in Virgo. So Virgo, we know, is mutable earth. It is the earthly manifestation of Mercury. So Virgo is very detail-oriented. It's very particular. It's very analytical. Earth is a cold, dry sign. So element, rather. So particularly analytical and interested in like systems and data and how all of the systems fit together. So moon in Virgo, someone who's just emotionally drawn to the finer details and systems in life. And he was really interested in that with all of his radio experience, because he like built a radio station like from the ground up. He was like really, really into all of the technical details and all of that sort of thing. So like you can just really, really see that. Now his moon is also conjunct Jupiter. It's not right on top. It's a little bit farther away, but it's still pretty close. So the moon, the emotional nature, is basically fused with Jupiter, the enthusiastic drive for like seeking like knowledge and understanding and travel and foreign things. So moon conjunct Jupiter, you get someone who is more emotionally drawn to like finding out the meaning of life in a Virgoan way. So emotionally drawn to understanding the world through its complex little systems. And he was really into that with the radio and talking to people and things like that. So that's the emotional nature, Jupiter. Let's talk more about Mercury, because Mercury in his chart is just so loud and apparent. So all of this here in Gemini in the 10th house, right in the middle of the sky. So it's very, very apparent. It's an angular house, so it's very energized. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of emphasis on this house. And then also all of this Virgo stuff in the first house. All of this is mercurial. It's Gemini, the airy manifestation of Mercury, Virgo, the earthly manifestation of Mercury. So basically that means art as a person and art's career both have a very distinctly mercurial nature. We can see that pretty easily. So Mercury has a lot to do with communication, as we said, but also like multiples of things. It likes to do things several times very often, and you can see this very easily in his career, because he had multiple radio shows. He had multiple books that he wrote. He had multiple kids, multiple wives, lots of severals going on. And this Mercury, the ruler of these two planets, is right in the middle of the sky. Just objective reality, just like right there, easy to see. So that makes a lot of sense. So there are more reasons that Mercury is really, really apparent and important in his chart. So Mercury is right at home in Gemini, so it's already very strong and able to like do what it wants because its environment helps facilitate that. B, it's in an angular house, the 10th house, which is in the middle of the sky. It's very apparent. There's a lot of energy there, so that emphasizes his Mercury too. Mercury is also the ruler of his ascendant, first house. So really important, really apparent. Mercury is also very fast in his chart. This chart image is not including all of the technical details of like speed or anything like that. I chose to just use like the very simple basic chart for this purpose. But you know that his Mercury is going very fast in his chart. So when a planet is moving very fast, it is able to like, the manifestations of it are probably going to be more apparent like earlier as opposed to later. Also, the planet is able to just like pick up on things very quickly. So we've got a very fast, very comfortable, very strong, very supported Mercury ruling the first house and the 10th house. And Art got involved with radio pretty early, actually. He became a like certified ham radio operator when he's like 13. So there you go, an early manifestation of that. It's just like so interesting and apparent. Another thing about Mercury in his chart is that it's also out of bounds. So we're not going to get too into out of bounds. It's basically based off of declination. I wish we had time for that because it's like my favorite thing of all of astrology. But anyways, when a planet is out of bounds, it basically means that it is like beyond the reach of the sun. So the sun is like the big boss of the solar system. So when a planet is beyond the reach of it, it kind of becomes like a renegade. So I like to liken it to like when you are a kid and your parents are like, okay, you're going to have the house to yourself now. We're going away for a couple days to do whatever. Don't have any parties. And the kid's like, okay, when the sun is there. But then they leave and it's like, oh yeah. So the planet becomes like super energized and just becomes kind of like a bit of a renegade and just wants to like do whatever it wants. So more energy in Art's Mercury there because it's out of bounds. So an out of bounds planet is it's very energized, and it's also can be like really weird because it doesn't really want to necessarily play by the rules. It kind of wants to like just do its own thing. And it's also really, really energized. So one way we can see this in Art's life is how he like set a world record for number of hours on the air, which is 116 hours. Whew. So yes, he's a Gemini. Yes, Geminis like to talk, but he's not just any Gemini. There is a lot more to it than that. So there's a lot of Gemini, a lot of very prominent out in the middle of the sky Gemini. Its ruler Mercury is there, making it stronger. The sun, the whole light of the solar system is focused in Gemini, but also his Mercury is very fast. So the ruler of all of this Gemini nature is very fast, very strong, very weird. So he's not just any Gemini. Like not every Gemini is going to want to be on the air for 116 hours at a time. That's ridiculous, honestly. So yeah, that's just like an example of like all of the nuance that fits together to like get a picture of who this person is. So what he did with that 116 hours on the air, he used the funds that he raised to actually rescue like 100 orphans in Saigon at the end of the Vietnam War. So you can kind of see that here with his Venus-Mars conjunction in the 9th house of foreign things. So Venus, peace, Mars, war. On one hand, he was a medic in the military, but then also there's that, Venus is much stronger in Taurus than Mars is. So the peace-loving nature is prevailing over the warlike nature. And this is all happening in the 9th house, which has to do with things abroad. So Venus, the nature of like wanting to like put people together, medic, Mars in a war abroad with Venus prevailing. So there's a lot of tenderness to him, and not just, like facts and communications and conversations and data and things like that. There's a lot more going on too. So let's see. Does anyone have any questions, by the way? I kind of rambled for a really long time.
No, I think everyone is just really, really enjoying it. Truly. It's amazing.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I kind of went through this earlier than I was expecting, honestly. So I can like keep talking a little bit about his own chart, or I can like answer more questions that people have. I thought I was gonna just like talk for like 3 hours, but I kind of zoomed through it a little bit. So
I would say give them a minute and questions may come, because I think everybody's brain was expanded during that. Just like incredible.
Yeah, I info dumped at you for quite a while, so yeah.
If you want to talk about, was it the declination?
Oh, okay. Sure. So most of what we were talking about before is based off of the ecliptic. So zodiacal longitude, celestial longitude, which is the path that the Earth is taking around the sun, the path that the planets are all taking around the sun. Declination is based off of the celestial equator, which is different. It's a different coordinate system. So this is actually like where the seasons come from. So the sun is like at the celestial equator on the equinoxes, so spring and summer, and it's farthest away from the celestial equator and the solstices, so winter and summer. So it can be a maximum of 23.5 degrees from the celestial equator at any given time, and it never goes beyond that, ever. So every planet also has, declination, in addition to its position along the ecliptic. So most of the time they're going to like be within that 23 degrees each way, but sometimes they can go beyond that. And when they do, they get super weird because they are beyond the reach of the sun, because the sun can never get more than 23 degrees north or south of the celestial equator, but other planets can. And when they do, they get super weird and super interesting. I love them. So that's like in a nutshell what declination means. And when planets are beyond that limit, they are said to be out of bounds.
We have a question from the chat from Hayton Holler, who wants to know if you have any advice for reading the charts of events rather than people.
So when you are reading the charts for events, the planets are gonna kind of like take on slightly different meanings, because they're not necessarily going to be like internal behavioral aspects. It's more going to be like external things. So like for mundane astrology, that has to do with like reading the charts for like political events. You can also use astrology to like look at like weather and things like that too. So for like a political event, for example, in mundane astrology, the sun is not going to be like your core individual self. It's going to be more along the lines of like the boss. So like the president, the emperor, the ruler, whoever is like in charge kind of thing. So it's basically like a different set of what's the word I'm looking for? A different set of meanings for all of the planets based off of that. I hope that was a good explanation.
Yeah, no, that was great. We have another question too. Are certain signs or people more susceptible or influenced by things like the current Mercury retrograde, for instance?
Yes, so Mercury is the ruler of Gemini and Virgo. So if you have a whole lot of Virgo or Gemini placements, you're gonna feel it for whatever Mercury is doing, basically. So for Art Bell, for example, he's probably, I mean, if like he was alive, he'd probably be feeling it a lot more apparently than someone who like had a lot more like Saturnian, Capricorn, Aquarius influences. This is especially the case if you are like a Gemini or Virgo sun, moon, or rising, because that is like way more in your face. So it's like the body, the mind, and soul kind of deal, where if you just have like, you know, one thing off in the 12th house in Gemini, it may not be as like apparent and in your face. So basically it depends on your chart, but yeah.
So like just all the details are so amazing. I'm just soaking it all in. This is just,
there's a whole lot of moving parts.
oh yeah. Let's see, does anyone else have any other questions? Sean just said, this explains why Mercury retrograde kills me.
Yeah, I'm a Gemini sun too, and every time I go through Mercury retrograde in the beginning, I'm like, all right, it's gonna be fine. It happens all the time, but it's also the ruler of like my sun, so perception. So I am more likely to perceive these sort of things happening. And because I used to be such a skeptic with astrology, I still kind of have a little bit of that, and I'll be like, all right, this is just Mercury retrograde, whatever, happens all the time, nothing's gonna happen unless it's just like a self-fulfilling prophecy or whatever. But then my mic broke today 2 hours before this presentation, and that's right, very clear Mercury retrograde sort of thing. So is that a self-fulfilling prophecy? Or is that just Mercury retrograde?
Right, exactly. Let's see. Any thoughts on retrograde motion and how it affects natal charts and such? Is another question.
So a retrograde planet in a natal chart doesn't have it's not that big of a deal, because all of the planets are going to be going retrograde at some point. The farther the planet is from the sun, the more time it spends retrograde. So like Pluto is retrograde for like a third of the time. So it being retrograde doesn't really matter all of that much. But like Mercury is very close to the sun in perception, that whole archetype of perception, and very close to us, and we can see it moving in the sky. I mean, like, it's not as like dramatic as the moon's motion through the sky, but it's still like noticeable, especially to the ancients. But in the natal chart, just having like a natal Mercury retrograde does not mean you are doomed to constant technological failures and miscommunications or anything like that. Not at all. It basically means you just need to like do the planet in your own way, kind of thing, because it's just kind of like going in its own direction. But that's fine. It's not a bad thing. It's a totally normal thing, because not everything in life is moving forward all the time. It's not always moving backward all the time. You can't always be inhaling and you can't always be exhaling. So there's both. So it's rare to find a chart where everything is direct. It's very likely to find at least one thing like retrograde in a chart. So it's a very normal thing. It is nothing at all to panic about. So like if you have Mercury retrograde in your chart, you basically just have to learn how to like talk and communicate like in your own way, kind of thing. That's basically what it means in a nutshell.
wonderful. My gosh, this is just so every time you answer a question, I'm like, wow. Lots of people saying, this is amazing. This has been really awesome. And I definitely agree.
Yay.
I am actually curious too about like the chart reading for this event as well.
Oh, for the convention?
Yeah, like I'm just wondering, like I wonder if there's anything in there that
I don't know if I looked at it. I mean, I looked at the chart for the time that I was supposed to start doing this, and I saw that Saturn was rising, so I was like, uh-oh, Saturn is the planet of like delay and failure. Oh no, what's going wrong? And my mic died. So luckily it was only something like minor like that.
Yeah.
So, but Saturn is also to do with like structure. And what we did today is look at like the core structure of a natal chart. So there you go.
That's awesome. Yeah. Let's see. Does anyone have any other questions at all?
I have a question. Are there any other historical figures or like celebrities that you've checked out their charts to try to analyze them? Like how regularly do you do this?
I look at people's charts every day, all the time. I was recently on the podcast The Eternal Void, but with Jazz, where I talked extensively about Ingo Swan's chart. Another Virgo rising. So that's interesting. Yeah, he's got a really cool chart too. So if you want to hear about Ingo's chart, go listen to that episode. I think it was episode, what number? 39? I'm pretty sure it's 39. I could be wrong though. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
And then also in Two Witches, that podcast, I talked about the charts of two nuns, not necessarily like famous public figures, but if you want to see what the charts of two nuns are like, you go look at that podcast. Yeah, it's very fun to do this.
Cool.
I'm popping in with your reminder that you had an announcement to make, because I actually remembered that.
Yes. Okay. So let me just give you the final slide. I'm glad that somebody reminded me. So yes, the announcement is basically that this convention, Paracon, has very kindly and generously sponsored a natal chart reading. So I'm doing a giveaway for it on Twitter. So if you want a chance to get a free natal chart reading from me, go over to my Twitter. I scheduled the tweet to announce like at 6 p.m. exactly. So at the end of this, go to my Twitter account at weird_astrology. And then you'll be able to see that and you can enter for a chance to win a free natal chart reading with me. This is the third time I've gotten to do this, actually. One of my favorite things about my career right now is how often people will donate the cost of a natal chart reading so I can do a giveaway for it on Twitter, because that gives people who aren't able to really like afford one a chance to, get their chart done. And that's just so much fun. I really love that I attract such generosity. And I'm very, very grateful for you fine people who have made this convention to give space for a whole bunch of people to talk, and also to sponsor another reading. So I'll be doing a giveaway for that on Twitter, so go look and see that. Yeah, it should be at 6 p.m. that tweet will happen.
Yes, is there a thunderstorm going on behind you?
No, you might have heard the air conditioner turn on though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Everyone go enter, go get that chart read, because truly, absolutely amazing. I listen to it every so often, just, to remind myself of my positive qualities. No, but really, like, it's so in depth, and I really just go do it.
Yay.
I have to second that. I'm extremely biased because I had my chart read and just really, the quality of the experience was like phenomenal. And there's nobody I would rather consult for astrology at this point. Just super thrilled. Everybody jump on that when the contest posts. Audra has a question. Audra just thought of a question. Go ahead, Audra, type it out.
Oh, and we have Jasper too.
Okay.
Is there any point in doing a person's death chart?
I'm not interested in that. I mean, if you want to learn about it, go ahead. But I know that like that would just give me anxiety, so I just don't deal with that. Yeah, I especially do not look at the charts of like the recently murdered. I think that is a not very kind use of astrology. I've got feelings about that, none of them very good. But yeah, so I mean, like you can, all parts of life you can see in a chart. So therefore you can, if you want. It's up to you.
And then Audra's question, any suggestions on doing charts for children versus adult? Is it too much pressure for a kid? Or she says also maybe not pressure, but could it perhaps lead people to push them where they want to go? Or do you think they're able to know what they want to do? All that sort of stuff.
It depends on the astrologer. There are some astrologers who specialize in doing charts for kids. I personally do not. I will only read for people 18 and up. My reasoning for that is because when you are a kid, not all of this is going to be like manifested at once. So it's not going, the information that you can get is not really all of that relevant for a child, really. At least like the way I use it. I also don't have kids, so this is just out of my realm of expertise. Like it definitely can be done. It's just not something that I do.
Gotcha. Yep. Let's see, does anyone else have any questions? All ready for the pop quiz?
No, there's no pop quiz.
We were all very relieved to find that out.
Yeah, no, not going to quiz you on any of this. My intent for this presentation was to just kind of like briefly familiarize people who are new to astrology with like what the like important parts are, and so like you get a better idea of what like everybody's talking about because astrology is getting super popular. So there you go. My hope is to facilitate learning and inspire people to like get curious and go off and like learn on their own, because it's a really fun feeling.
Absolutely.
And on your URL here, that is for everything, right? We can see jewelry as well.
mmkelly.space is the homepage. Okay. The one here /astrology, that's just where new and returning clients can book for an astrology reading in particular. If you just go to mmkelly.space, that'll show you everything. That's like the main homepage.
All right. Anything that you want to go back on that you were like, we didn't have enough time for, but there's one particular thing? Or are you?
Not that I can think of. I didn't expect to go through this fast, because the last time it was like 2.5, 3 hours that I was, so it was kind of surprising to me.
It's hard to time that stuff out.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And
also,
go ahead.
This is also my very first time doing like a live public speaking thing around a lot of people. Like I'll do live charts on a one-on-one basis with people, and that's fine. But this is like, oh my goodness, so kind of nerve-wracking. So that's probably why I ended up like speeding through it a little bit. So sorry.
Oh
I
yeah,
need to apologize. I mean, that was so informative. Like just incredible. I didn't feel rushed at all.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
and we're pretty good. Like we were figuring, you know, cut it off at like 5:45, just because you never know. But yeah, no, this was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yay. I'm so glad that you all liked it. Yeah, it was really fun to
glad
do.
that you were willing to come on and do this with us for the first time.
Yeah.
I learned so much.
Yay. Yeah, this was a big deal for me because the last time I was supposed to do a public speaking thing in front of a bunch of people was like well over a decade ago when I had to do a final for a public speaking class when I was like very briefly taking college classes. And I failed that final because I was too afraid to show up. So this is a big deal for me.
Yeah, well, we're so glad you're here.
Yes.
Yay. Huzzah.
Yay.
So thank you all so much for having me, and thank you to all of the people watching. I appreciate you all. Yes. Thank you for letting me ramble at you for an hour and a half about why I dig astrology so much.
It's a very informative ramble.
Yep.
Yay.
All right. Well, I can pop you out, or if you want to jump out, it's all up to you. I never know. I'm like, should I just remove people or?
Right. You never want to be rude and just be like, bye now.
Yeah. Right. All right. Well, have a great rest of your day, and thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you so
much.
much. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.